I've got a huge variety of things to talk about, largely from my perspective as an art historian, to be able to see how the visual evidence can complicate the history that we normally receive only from texts. And I'm going to try and compare them alongside certain core ideas that have had no small influence on the way we perceive things. Jung famously, of course, worked on the Red Book and took the idea of mandalas. And the mandalas and the chakras of the body are supposed to be very much a kind of a metaphor for being able to look within and to be able to go into the deep recesses of the mind, as it were, as a metaphor for the deep recesses of the world outside. So with those ideas, I began to think about what are the ways in which, and the core terms that come up in Sanskrit that personify or exemplify these things in architecture and in the physical understanding of the body. And the word seed that lies deep within as Bïja, and the word Garbha-Gṛha come up again and again. The word Garbha-Gṛha literally just means the womb chamber. And the idea of the womb chamber is the sanctum sanctorum of a Hindu temple. And inside the Garbha-Gṛha, what sanctifies it ultimately is not just the idol, which is consecrated, but in the foundations of a temple, there is what we call the Garbha-dhatu, or the materials of the womb, which are relic-like deposits that are kept in a Garbha-bhajan box, which are put in a subterranean chamber underneath the temple that enliven that temple. These are the sacred deposits, relic-like deposits that are kept there. And the idea finds mention and clear articulation only in a group of Sanskrit texts that really come up in about the 10th century AD. And Stella Kramrisch worked on them when she looked at the Kāmic Agama. And then the other Agama texts might be about the 8th to 10th century, might be as early as the 8th. So whereas the textual sources seem to be largely medieval, I think, and Anna Slashka has worked on this as well, and I've put these two books here for anyone who's interested in these consecration rituals and these concepts. But I think actually the ideas do go back to a much older history. And here we have a set of relic caskets from Buddhist stūpas, two little caskets over here. And those are the kind of things that they contained, these little offerings, sometimes confetti-like, but made out of pure gold or made out of precious stones. And they would be combined sometimes with a little image of a mother goddess-like figure who would be interred and kept within these relic caskets. And there are two of them that I've shown here from the most ancient and most sacred of the oldest known Buddhist stūpas. And that makes us think about what kind of traditions must have been interacting with the Indo-European and with the Aryan and with the Vedic traditions, and where did these older traditions and where might they have come from? And that takes us to a whole other level of mythology and practice, which goes back to very ancient animistic and shamanistic ideas. And John Irwin, who used to work at the V&A, did some fantastic work where he made an invaluable study of the worship of sacred termite mounds and molehills, which are often known by the misnomer of ant hills, which have networks of channel that go deep into the earth, invariably to a water source. And they can sometimes go 40 to 80 meters down underground, although overground they're sort of seldom over 6 or 7 feet, would be the highest that you would normally see a termite mound. They are the basis of the archetypal tomb, relic deposits to ancestors, stūpas, fertility rituals for the future of communities, the locus of annual ceremonies for crop cycles, and later linked to the networks of caves in mountains, which in turn form a conceptual model for the Garbha-Gṛha in the temple. So you have this idea that there is this network that lives within, and I think he was trying to develop the idea that these ideas were the foundation. So when we see early Buddhist art, and you see a stūpa which has the relic casket in front of it, you see it protected by those serpent hoods that are coming up on the sides. And there are the serpents that live with the termites in the termite mound, keeping moist, and they come out periodically to guard the relics and to guard the center of the earth and the sacred. And so you have ancient tree shrines and ancient snakes. Those are actually entwined sculptures of entwined snakes, which are considered sacred. And people continue to worship them now, as they did, of course, 2,000 years ago. But this kind of worship finds no mention and clear articulation in any of the ancient Sanskrit texts or medieval ones. And so this brings us to a very curious thing that has been the subject of what art historians have been able to offer the scholarly community by doing both an ethnography or an anthropological study, but combining that with the visual source material to be able to come up with a parallel history of what might have been going on. And we have the work of F.D.K. Bosch, who looks at this water cosmogony idea, and we have the works of Kumaraswamy, who had also talked about the same thing, looking at tree spirits, looking at termite mounds, looking at sacred snakes, naga shrines, and he worked on a couple of monographs. One was on the elements of Buddhist iconography, and the other on the element called yakṣas, who are the spirits of the trees. Now, these trees still remain worshipped widely in South Asia, and they go back to these sculptures, which are all about 2,000 years old, mostly 1st century BC to 1st century AD sculptures. And you see over here the tree spirit dryad, where she is what we call the śālabhañjikā yakṣi, the tree spirit who is the fertilizing spirit. There you see the tree spirit who has got an umbilical connection with the forces of nature, and with particularly a lotus rhizome. And then you see the naga, or the serpent, within which dwells the person. One might imagine that where is all this animism going, and how is it all linked to the idea of the underworld? Well, the tree is very much something that draws the moisture and the sap of the earth and takes it to fruition on top. And you get the same idea with this umbilical connection with nature and the yakṣa spirit, who is connected to the lotus, which is very much like this pillar. Now, so powerful are these ideas, and that they get absorbed into mainstream iconography of the mainstream religions, of organized religion. And the earliest depictions, for instance, of Queen Māyā, the mother of the Buddha, is exactly in the same pose as the woman who is the tree spirit, giving birth physically to the body of the Buddha, as you can see in this particular relief. Now, if the earth and moisture are regarded as being the preserve of the earth mother and feminine in nature, then what do we make of the idea of the verticality of the tree and its phallic symbolism? And where does that come from? And we must equally then consider the fact that the pillar becomes an equally ancient way. It stands at the center of a termite mound as a column as well. And it forms, the termites create a column in the center of the mound around which the network of caves works. And this symbolism seems to get sort of absorbed into the construction of a stūpa, and then also into the idea of the cosmic eternal linga, which is a cosmic linga of fire that is supposed to come out of an inferno, which has neither beginning nor end. So is there always this feminine aspect to the earth? Is it always to be personified as feminine? Does all archetypal myth take it to the feminine? Well, more often than not, yes, it does. And usually all mainstream religions then, when organized religion comes up in Hinduism, Vishnu takes on two consorts, his two wives. One is Śrī, who is a personification of the lotus and the water. And the other is Bhū, which is the earth. So earth and water become the two consorts of Vishnu. And in each of his incarnations, most famously in his incarnation as Rama, his wife is Sītā. Sītā literally means a furrow in which you plant seeds. And Sītā is, of course, at the end of the epic of the Ramayana, she can't bear the insult of society any longer, and so she asks her mother, the earth, to consume her. Still a popular story, comes up in all the children's comic books, and one that one sort of looks at even now repeatedly. Now, this idea of the depths in which the goddess lives and is the source of moisture is beautifully captured by these, in this case, about 1800 years ago, images, and that about 1500 years old. These sculptures of a woman who is shown giving birth with the head of a lotus, and these are carved at freshwater springs, which become sites for the goddess. So inasmuch as the idea of the earth and the goddess becomes spaces and shrines which are associated with an underworld, you also don't see this as a negative space necessarily. What I've been trying to get at is how the earth and these spaces of water might also be seen in a more positive way, rather than being as a punishing space or a place where you are relegated to. Periodically, the earth quakes in mythology, and that comes up repeatedly when the Buddha, for instance, achieves enlightenment, and they personify the earth in sculpture, again and again, sitting beneath the Buddha, as he calls the earth to witness the fact that he is enlightened. So the earth is not something that is negative. The mountain with the cave within it becomes the basis for the construction of the temple. And all temples are therefore shaped like mountains, which have a core, which is the Garbha-Gṛha, the cave-like sanctum inside it. There are sacred caves, which are very ancient. And when natural caves were not there, this is a cave in which the Buddha is supposed to have meditated and is worshipped by all pilgrims. But this idea of the sacred cave, where mortals can retire to achieve transcendence, and even gods come and acknowledge the sacredness of these shrines, is well attested to in the visual evidence. And so people actually began to carve out entire caves and spaces like this. The cella that are created can therefore be apsidal, like a basilica. They can be circular, square, or oblong. There are specific Sanskrit texts that then go in medieval times that tell us what kind of sanctum is appropriate for which deity and what quality. I'm going to end by showing you something which is the most remarkable of them all, perhaps, which are the open shrines where there is no cave, which are the temples to the supreme goddess energies, the Yoginī tantric temples, where the entire temple is shaped like a yoni, and there are the goddesses, the 64 goddesses that circle it, in the center of which is the site of Shiva, which is what you see there, the male seed that lies in the center. Now, as my final slide, and this is where I end, we need to think about a parallel idea. With all of this visual culture and visual evidence, we also need to come back full circle to those who actually believe that all of this visual culture and art and sculpture is but an illusion. And so they believe that the most sacred is that which the earth itself offers you, which is in Sanskrit called svayaṃbhū. Svayam meaning yourself, bhū of the earth. And these are naturally occurring forms, whether they be crystals or they be ammonites or they be lingams, which are created by the earth itself. And since they are not made by man, they are considered the most sacred, and there are long Sanskrit texts, like the one I've shown you at the bottom, that actually list out the different kind of ammonites that may be worshipped, or the different kinds of crystals. So just as the earth can offer these things, those who sit in meditation long enough can also turn into crystal and turn into one with the earth. And there are enough myths and legends about that, how you also become one of the elements of the earth yourself. So you can be generated from the earth, and you can also revert to the earth. Thank you.
I'll ask one very brief question.
Yeah.
In some of these cases, we see beautiful images of going inner. In other cases, we're going under and downward. In both of those cases, is it the same sacredness that we find? And what is it that is sacred here?
I think, the good and evil idea is a very tough one to be able to address, and always has been in Hindu philosophy. And I think this idea that we have this very clear demarcation normally doesn't really hold. When you have certain deities like Kali or like Narasimha, who are so fierce and monstrous and powerful, if you've got so accustomed to worshipping an image, which would, under normal circumstances, be a scary image, then what capacity have you left in your imagination for making a scary image that is going to be a personification of punishment and hell? None. Right? So you've normalized it through the visual culture as a part and parcel of being. So there isn't a space that you have left as a demarcated space, which is going to be a punishing space, perhaps. Now, that said, there are, from the Bhagavad Purana onward in the 5th century, there are descriptions of hell and the underworld. But that, I think, is a subject for another talk. And I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. A lovely sense. The monstrous is not always monstrous in the Indian world. Thank you so much. Right.